A young dog and an old dog meet in a field. The old one drops its front legs flat to the ground, sticks its back end in the air, and freezes there for a second with its tail going. The young one understands the message instantly, and the two of them explode into a chase that goes nowhere and settles nothing. No food is won, no territory changes hands. They are burning energy, taking small risks, and getting nothing out of it that you could weigh or eat. And every mammal on Earth, given half a chance, does some version of this. It looks, to us, like the most pointless behavior an animal could choose. But that pose the old dog made has a name. Biologists call it the play bow, and it is one of the clearest signals in the animal world. It means everything that happens next is not real. The bites will not be real bites. The chase is not a real hunt. For one stretch of time, the normal rules of survival are switched off, and two animals agree to pretend. And once you notice that animals build entire signals just to announce that they are about to have fun, a strange question opens up underneath the whole history of our species. If a dog needs fun, and a dolphin needs fun, then what did the first humans do with theirs? If that kind of question makes your brain lean forward, this is a good channel to follow, because we chase exactly these threads all the way back to the bone, and this one goes very deep. Because fun is not soft, and it is not extra. The scientist who studied this more carefully than almost anyone was Gordon Burghardt, an ethologist at the University of Tennessee, who in 2005 published a book called The Genesis of Animal Play. He wanted to stop people from waving the word around loosely, so he wrote down 5 hard rules a behavior must pass before you are allowed to call it play. It has to be useless in the moment. It has to be done for its own sake, because the animal wants to. It has to look different from the serious version of the same act. It has to be repeated, but not in a rigid, stuck way. And it has to happen when the animal is fed, safe, and unstressed. That last rule is the important one. Play is what an animal does when nothing is trying to kill it. And once Burghardt had that filter, he started finding play in places nobody expected. He documented a Nile crocodile giving rides to smaller companions on its back, and crocodiles sliding down slopes over and over. Other researchers watched octopuses, which are basically aliens with 8 arms and no bones, push a plastic bottle into a jet of water again and again just to watch it bounce back, like a child throwing a ball against a wall. Wasps have been seen doing things that look like play. And this scatters the behavior so far across the tree of life that it tells you something almost unbelievable. The urge to mess around for no reason is older than mammals, older than dinosaurs, sitting somewhere very deep in the machinery of a brain. So why would evolution, which is famously ruthless about waste, ever pay for this? Play burns calories a starving animal cannot spare. It makes noise that draws predators. Young animals hurt themselves doing it, and yet it survived hundreds of millions of years of natural selection, which means it must quietly pay for itself somehow. The leading answer is that play is training that does not feel like training. A fox cub pouncing on its sibling is building the exact movements it will need to catch a real mouse, wiring the muscle and the timing, while the cost of failure is still zero. Play lets a young brain rehearse the most dangerous moments of adult life inside a safe bubble, over and over, until the moves are burned in. But there is a second payoff, and it matters even more for an animal like us. Play teaches you how to read other minds. When two young animals wrestle, they are constantly testing a fragile agreement. Bite too hard, and the game ends, and your partner walks away. So they learn to hold back, to take turns, to let the weaker one win sometimes so the game keeps going. Researchers call this self-handicapping, and it is the raw beginning of fairness. A creature that plays is a creature learning the rules of living alongside others without getting killed for a mistake. Which means that for a species that survives entirely by cooperating in groups, fun was never a break from the real work. Fun was the classroom where the real work got learned. And humans took this deeper than any animal alive because we did not just play, we built objects to play with, and some of them survived long enough for us to hold today. The oldest are so simple you would walk past them. Deep in the ancient world, people played with the ankle bones of sheep and goats, a small knobbly bone called the astragalus, which happens to land on one of 4 distinct sides when you throw it. That makes it a natural die, and children and adults across Greece, Rome, Egypt, and the Near East threw them for luck and for games we now call knucklebones. It is one of the oldest gambling tools on Earth, and it was already lying inside every animal our ancestors ate. The first dice were not invented, they were noticed. And from those bones came something more organized. In the 1920s, the archaeologist Leonard Woolley was digging in the royal cemetery of the ancient city of Ur in what is now Iraq when he pulled from the ground a stunning board inlaid with shell and blue lapis lazuli, around 4,500 years old. It was clearly a game, but nobody had the faintest idea how you were meant to play it, and the board sat as beautiful mysteries for decades. Then a curator at the British Museum named Irving Finkel, an expert in cuneiform, found the answer written on a battered clay tablet from around 177 years before Christ, scratched by a Babylonian astronomer. Finkel translated the rules and brought the royal game of back to life after thousands of years of silence. A racing game for 2 players, pieces sprinting around a track, decided by the throw of those same knucklebone dice. A game nobody had played for millennia could suddenly be played again. And Egypt had its own obsession, which was even older. By around 3,100 years before Christ, at the very dawn of the pharaohs, Egyptians were playing a board game called Senet, 30 squares in 3 rows, pieces moving according to throwing sticks. It began as pure entertainment, but over the centuries it grew heavy with meaning, until Egyptians came to see the board as a journey of the soul through the underworld. A Senet board was buried with the boy king Tutankhamun, so he would have something to play in the afterlife. So a game that started as a way to kill an afternoon became, for one civilization, a map of the road to eternal life. But not every ancient game needed a fancy board, and one of them is still played by millions of people right now. Mancala is the name for a whole family of counting games where you scoop seeds or pebbles from little pits and sow them around a track, and all you truly need to play is some holes in the ground and a handful of stones. Archaeologists have found rows of cup-shaped hollows carved into stone at ancient sites across Africa and the Middle East that look exactly like Mancala boards, though I will be honest that dating scratches in rock is genuinely hard, and the very oldest claims are argued over. What is not argued over is how little the game asks for. A person with idle hands, some pebbles, and a friend has almost everything a human has ever needed to turn empty time into a contest. And that instinct to carve fun into stone reaches back to a place that rewrites the timeline entirely. At Göbekli Tepe in southern Turkey, a hill covered in massive T-shaped pillars raised around 11,500 years ago, before farming, before pottery, before the wheel, archaeologists have found game-like arrangements of small holes and counters cut into the rock. People gathered at this site in numbers, hauling stones that weighed as much as 10 cars, and while they were there, it seems, some of them sat down and played. Which quietly demolishes a comfortable assumption that games are a luxury of settled, wealthy, bored societies. The oldest monumental site we know of has fun scratched right into its floor. And the youngest members of every ancient group had their own kit, because children have always needed something to do with their hands. Archaeologists keep pulling toys out of the ground. Clay rattles with pebbles sealed inside, found in Bronze Age graves, and shaped so a baby could grip them. Little carved animals on wheels from ancient Egypt and Persia pull along horses and hedgehogs thousands of years old. Spinning tops turn up on nearly every inhabited continent, and the yo-yo is so old that the ancient Greeks painted children playing with one on their pottery. And the games with no objects at all are even harder to date, but probably the oldest of the lot, because tag, hide-and-seek, and rough chasing appear in more or less every human culture ever recorded, which is exactly the pattern you would expect from something built into us long before any of those cultures split apart. So play and games are ancient. But the ancestors did not only compete against each other, they also learned to fill the air, and this is where the story turns from bones to something you can almost hear. In caves in southern Germany, in the Swabian Jura, archaeologists led by Nicholas Conrad reported in 2009 a set of flutes carved from the wing bones of vultures and from mammoth ivory at sites called Hohlefels and Geisenklosterle. These flutes are at least 40,000 years old, and one of them is nearly complete, with finger holes drilled in careful spacing and a notched end to blow across. Somebody sat in an Ice Age cave, took the hollow bone of a giant bird, and worked it patiently into an instrument that could carry a tune. That is not survival. That is a person who wanted to make the dark sound less empty. And the debate over how far back music goes gets even stranger, because there is one object older still that people cannot agree about. In 1995, in a cave called Divje Babe in Slovenia, the archaeologist Ivan Turk found a fragment of a young cave bear's thigh bone with 2 clean holes punched through it, in a spot and a spacing that looked like the beginnings of a flute. If it really is one, it was made by Neanderthals, not by us, more than 50,000 years ago. But other scientists pushed back hard, arguing that the holes are simply tooth marks, the bite of a hyena crunching the bone for marrow. The argument is still not fully settled, and that uncertainty is itself the point. We are staring at a scrap of bone, trying to decide whether another kind of human, long gone, once made music in the dark. The stakes of 2 small holes are enormous. Because rhythm, it turns out, is not just pretty, it is glue. Researchers at Oxford, including Bronwyn Tarr, Jacques Launay, and Robin Dunbar, ran a series of studies in the 2010s on what happens inside people when they move in time together. They found that synchronized movement, drumming and dancing as a group, triggers a release of endorphins, the brain's own painkillers, and sharply raises how bonded people feel to the ones moving beside them. In one experiment, they even measured pain thresholds and found that people who danced in sync could tolerate more discomfort afterward, a sign of the endorphin flood. So a drum circle is not decoration around a community. It may be one of the machines that builds the community in the first place, chemically stitching strangers into a we. And that machine is easiest to see in the thing music was almost certainly made for, which is dance. Some of the oldest images humans ever painted, at the Bhimbetka rock shelters in central India, where certain panels reach back into the Stone Age, show rows of little figures with linked arms and bent knees, caught mid-step, unmistakably dancing together. Across the world, from sand rock art in Africa to caves in Europe, the same scene keeps appearing. Not one figure, but a line or a ring of them, moving as one. Nobody paints a solitary chore that often. They painted the moment the group became a single moving body, because that moment mattered enough to press onto stone and keep forever. But dance was not only celebration. For many ancient peoples, it was a doorway out of the ordinary mind. Among the San of southern Africa, whose way of life stretches back into deep antiquity, the central ritual is the healing dance, where people clap and stamp and move in a circle around a fire for hours until some of the dancers enter a trance, their bodies shaking, their awareness sliding somewhere else. Anthropologists who study altered states argue this trance dancing is one of the oldest religious technologies we have, a way for a whole group to reach an extreme experience together and come back changed. So dance sat at the exact seam where fun and the sacred met. You moved your body for joy, and if you moved it long enough, you could dance your way straight out of the world. And when the dancing stopped and people sat back down, the fire did something to human talk that we are only now measuring. The anthropologist Polly Wiesner spent decades among the Jew-Hohansi, a hunter-gatherer people of the Kalahari, and in a 2014 study in the journal PNAS, she did something quietly brilliant. She recorded conversations and sorted them by time of day. In daylight, she found talk was practical and often sharp. About 80% of it was economic, plans and complaints and gossip that policed who was pulling their weight. But at night, around the fire, the whole texture changed. Roughly 80% of the Firelight talk was stories. The day was for managing each other. The night was for enchanting each other. And those Firelight stories were not idle. Wiesner argued they did essential work. They carried the names of distant relatives and the map of who was connected to whom across enormous distances. They taught the rules of the culture through tales of ancestors and spirits, and they let people imagine minds and places far beyond the campfire, stretching the imagination in a way daytime chatter never could. She called stories, together with gifs, the original social media, which reframes the whole idea of a bedtime story. The habit of gathering in the dark to be carried off by a voice is not a modern comfort bolted onto human life. It may be one of the deepest engines of how we became a knowledge-sharing species at all. And some of those stories may be almost unimaginably old, older than any pyramid or any written word. Look up at the cluster of stars called the Pleiades, the Seven Sisters. Across the world, in ancient Greece, in Aboriginal Australia, in Native American traditions, the same odd detail repeats. There are said to be 7 sisters, but most people can only see 6 stars. The Australian astronomer Ray Norris and his colleagues have argued that this shared story of a lost or hidden sister may preserve a real memory from around 100,000 years ago, when the stars sat in slightly different positions and one of them would have been easier to see before drifting closer to its neighbor. If that is right, then a piece of entertainment, a tale told to pass a night, may be the oldest story on Earth, handed mouth to mouth down 4,000 generations without ever being written down. So here is where the whole picture flips over, and it is worth stopping on, because it undoes the way most of us imagine the deep past. We tend to picture ancient life as a grim, unbroken struggle to survive, with maybe a rare festival to break the misery. But look again at everything we have just seen. The play that trained the body, the games that taught fairness and patience, the music and dance that bonded the group and released the pain-killing chemistry that held it together, the stories that carried the entire map of the culture. None of that is a break from survival. All of it is survival, wearing the mask of fun. For our ancestors, the line between playing and preparing, between celebrating and belonging, between a good time and staying alive, barely existed at all. And the deepest cut against the grim picture came from an anthropologist named Marshall Salins, who in the late 1960s gave a lecture with a title that offended people: The Original Affluent Society. He gathered the field studies of surviving hunter-gatherers and pointed at a number nobody expected. These people, with no farms and no storehouses, were not scraping by from dawn to dusk. Groups like the San seemed to secure everything they needed, all the food and shelter and tools, in something like 15 to 20 hours of work a week. The rest of their time was theirs. They talked, they visited, they made music, they slept in the afternoon, they played. By that measure, a foraging ancestor may have had more genuine leisure, more free hours to simply enjoy being alive, than most people reading this ever will. But not all their fun was gentle, because some of the oldest joy we can dig up came out of a cup. At that same cave in Israel where the Natufians buried their dead, called Raqefet Cave, the archaeologist Li Liu and her team reported in 2018 the oldest evidence of alcohol ever found: residues of a wheat and barley beer brewed in stone mortars around 13,000 years ago. And here is the part that upends the textbook order of history. This beer is older than farming. People may have first bothered to gather and process wild grain not to bake daily bread, but to brew something for a feast. It is at least possible that one of the reasons humans settled down and invented agriculture, the single biggest change in our history, was partly a thirst for a good drink at a good party. And feasting itself may be a bigger force in history than we ever gave it credit for. Back at Göbekli Tepe, that 11,000-year-old hill of pillars, archaeologists found the remains of enormous quantities of animal bone and huge stone vats that likely held fermenting liquid, the leftovers of feasts on a scale that would have needed hundreds of people to pull off. The archaeologist Klaus Schmidt, who led the digs there, suspected that the desire to gather in big numbers to feast and worship and celebrate is what drove people to build the monument, rather than the other way around. Which flips the usual story once more. Maybe civilization was not built first, with parties added later. Maybe the party came first, and the need to keep throwing it is part of what built civilization. So the ancients drank, and they gathered, and they also competed, because the urge to find out who is fastest and strongest is written very deep. Wrestling appears again and again in ancient art, from cave paintings to a famous set of Egyptian tomb walls at Beni Hassan, painted around 4,000 years ago, which show hundreds of wrestlers frozen through move after move like a training manual. And in the Americas, people took competition to an astonishing extreme. By around 1600 years before Christ, cultures in Mesoamerica were bouncing solid rubber balls, some weighing several kilograms, across purpose-built stone courts. The ballgame was fun and spectacle and religion all at once, sometimes tied to human sacrifice. Long before any modern stadium, people were shaping the land itself into an arena and packing in to watch a match. And the plainest contests need no arena and no ball, just a stretch of open ground and two people who both think they are faster. Running races are almost certainly among the oldest sports on Earth, so old they leave almost no trace, but we can catch them the moment riding arrives. The ancient Olympic Games in Greece began, by tradition, in 776 years before Christ, and the very first event, for many years the only event, was a straight sprint the length of the stadium. Those famous games were themselves a religious festival grafted onto a running habit far older than the record, and the same is true of swimming, which shows up painted on the wall of a Saharan cave known as the Cave of Swimmers, figures caught mid-stroke in a desert that was green and wet 10,000 years ago. Wherever there was flat ground or deep water, people turned their own bodies into the contest. And underneath all the boards and balls and drums sits the simplest fun of all, the kind that needs no equipment whatsoever, making each other laugh. Humor is so old that we can name the oldest joke ever written down. It is Sumerian, scratched onto a tablet around 1900 years before Christ, and it is, of all things, a fart joke, something which has never happened since the beginning of time, a young woman who did not break wind in her husband's lap. It is nearly 4,000 years old, it is a bit crude, and the structure is instantly familiar, a setup and a punchline. The very first joke we can still read is proof that people have been groaning at bad humor for as long as they have been able to write it down. But laughter is far, far older than any written joke, because it is not really a human invention at all. The neuroscientist Jock Panksepp discovered that rats, when you tickle them, produce bursts of high-pitched chirps that his research tied to something like joy, and the rats would chase his hand to be tickled again. And when Marina Davila Ross and her colleagues recorded the sounds young apes make when they are tickled and played, and mapped them against one another, they found that human laughter sits neatly on the same family tree as the panting play sounds of chimps, gorillas, and orangutans. Which means laughter did not begin with jokes. It began millions of years ago as the sound an animal makes during rough and tumble play, a signal that says, this is still just for fun, don't stop. We built comedy on top of a noise our ancestors were already making in the trees. And the same goes for the prank and the tease, that particular delight in gently messing with someone you trust. Watch any group of young apes and you will see one poke another and dart away, tug a tail, snatch a stick and dangle it just out of reach, then dissolve into play panting when the chase begins. This is teasing, and it is the raw root of every prank a human has ever pulled. It only works between individuals who know each other well enough to be sure the joke will not turn into a real fight, which makes it, like all the rest, a quiet test of a bond. So even mischief, the most throwaway fun imaginable, turns out to be doing the same deep work as everything else. It is two minds confirming that they are safe with each other. So gather all of it up. The dog's play bow and the crocodile's slide, the sheep bone that became the first die, the board decoded after thousands of years of silence, the vulture bone flute in the freezing cave, and the two argued over holes that might be a Neanderthal's song, the dance painted onto Indian rock, the trance around the sand fire, the stories that only came out at night, the lost sister among the stars. The beer older than bread, the feast that may have built a monument, the rubber ball, the fart joke, the tickled ape. None of it was decoration on the surface of survival. All of it was the thing itself, the way our kind bonds and learns and remembers and holds together against the dark. And that is the quiet truth hiding under a question that sounds almost childish. What did ancient humans do for fun? They did nearly everything you still do. The fire has become a screen. The vulture bone flute has become whatever song is stuck in your head today. The board of shell and lapis has become a phone in your hand on a slow afternoon. But the animal bent over the game, the one moving in time with the drum, the one leaning in toward a voice telling a story in the dark, is exactly the same animal, running the same ancient program, discovering the same thing every generation has to discover for itself. That the point of staying alive was never only to stay alive. It was to have, in the safe warm hours when nothing was trying to kill you, a little bit of fun.